Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to the Total Recall podcast with me, Will Bourne. And we are joined in this episode by Natalie, who's an awesome talent acquisition specialist who I've had the pleasure of working with over the course of the last few years. Natalie Ledbetter was the talent advisor, everything advisor, in fact, to one of the well-known VCs based in New York. So Natalie, welcome. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Will. I really appreciate it. I'm excited because obviously, like you said, we've had a really good relationship over the years.
Yeah. I've been looking forward to talking to you because you and I have had a lot of very lengthy conversations about talent, about recruitment, about operations, about scaling up, about all of the things
Right.
that people in your portfolio and my clients face day by day with one thing or another. So I'll let you introduce yourself and
Sure.
kind of talk a little bit about you and your journey, so that
hmm
people listening, perhaps they don't have the pleasure of the visual, to kind of, I
Sure.
suppose, understand a bit about you and who you are. So, who are you?
Yeah. Like you said, my name is Natalie Ledbetter. I have about 20 years of experience. The last 10 I have spent in startups and or startup adjacent in the VC world. So I did three startups back to back as essentially the people ops leader. Two of them I was highly focused on talent acquisition. And then the last one, I really owned kind of everything and I was able to build a team underneath me. So I had actually like a six-person talent acquisition team underneath me.
Mm,
Um, and then the last 3 years, I was in VC, like you said, working with startups on everything that really touched people ops. And a lot of that was the recruiting piece, teaching them how to fish, really having them, trying to get them to understand what the profiles and DNA looks like or should look like in your founding team, introducing them to talent, bringing in partners, etc. And working sort of in that function. So I was not on the investments team, but I was, very involved after the investment was made with all of our founders.
right. So they would effectively trust you with, we've got this startup. It's got a massive demand on top of it of what we expect from them. We've invested this money. Now they need to go and grow. And it's a dev first company. Let's say there's six engineers in there, but they need to hire this, and they need to scale to America. They need to do all these things. You're the person that they landed that on the doorstep of, right?
Well, I would just say, once you've scaled three organizations, with the last one being, we scaled it from in 2 years, 11x. I think that you start to get pattern recognition. And I think that's actually what's super valuable to the founders is really trying to get like proactive, which is nearly impossible in startups because everyone's sprinting.
Mm,
But really, working with them to identify talent, to onboard talent, to train talent, to develop talent, a myriad of things
yeah.
from kind of that point. Also from the sort of employer branding piece all the way through. And yeah, so it was a ton of fun, and I was able to apply the real world experience that I
Mm,
got from being the leader in those three startups to kind of the work that I was doing there. And again,
yeah.
my goal was really to help them avoid common mistakes that I've seen lots of founders make over and over again,
hmm
and to get them in a position where they don't have to touch the stove to know that it's hot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
lots of fun.
And I think one of the reasons that I enjoy talking to you and was looking forward to talking to you here was because I think you represent what the evolution of TA, talent acquisition, is or should be. And I think,
Mhm.
especially now, given the economic circumstances in which a lot of TAs find themselves, there is a bit of a breath of fresh air in what I hear from you every time we've spoken, as much as you are involved in everything. No, not just bum on seat recruitment, where you're kind of just finding talent.
Yep.
You have to protect the welfare of the startup. So the people that you're putting into these organizations, you have to make sure that there's a culture there in which these people can thrive.
That's
Um,
right.
And I genuinely believe that that is where the TA role should head. And
Hmm.
you and one other person that I know pioneer that in the way that you get
Mm.
involved with L&D and HR and
Hmm.
branding and employee retention schemes. Um, and I think this lends itself well to kind of one of the challenges faced from a talent perspective in a
Hmm.
startup. I have my opinions on that, and I know they're closely
Yep.
aligned to yours, but talk to me about life in a VC and the challenges
Hmm.
faced from a talent perspective.
Sure. So, I mean, there were lots of challenges, but what I would say is, first and foremost, I was lucky enough to craft my own role. So I built this program called People Ops as a Service, where essentially once an employee, well, essentially I started with attraction, and I would work with founders to really build their employer brand. Help them scale the recruiting process. Actually, sometimes I'd go in and even put the ATS in myself, warm up the communications, etc.
Mhm.
And I was sort of like an augmented people leader or talent leader for all of our companies. And what I would say, challenge wise, is that's a hard thing to scale when you're making lots and lots of investments, which we were at the time, and you're bringing on new founders. So essentially, what would happen is, we'd make an investment, and then they'd bring me in, and I'd kind of take it from there in terms of getting them in a place where they're thinking about the right things because they were starting to build those founding teams and laying the kind of foundational HR, talent development types of things, sort of V1 of what that should look like, so that
Mhm.
when they actually kind of got their A round, they could just take off and start hiring.
Yeah.
But I would say, that is really hard to scale. And when you're talking about early stage founders, they don't have the time to sit down and read a playbook. They don't really have the time,
Yeah.
nor do they make the time, which is completely understandable, to sit on a webinar and hear, you know,
Mm.
me present about something. So what I realized very quickly was it was actually the operator side of me. It was the fact that I had done it and built it before that they really found valuable, because I would come in, work with them to build a program, make it bespoke for them and their teams, and then we go together and kind of socialize whatever it was to the rest of the employees. So yeah, I would say that was kind of the biggest challenge was just that scaling piece. How do you scale that out for all of your
Mhm.
founders? And again, when you're having new people come in constantly,
Yeah.
so being the operator is just a free kind of strategic muscle that comes with your investment and builder to help you kind of really create the foundation, which is something I don't think a lot of VCs are actually doing, is bringing in someone with that expertise, and someone who can actually build for or with them,
Yeah.
which was something that I really loved about Boldstart, was that I had the freedom to kind of
Mm.
do those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then I would just say the last thing is, like, and this is maybe just more a me thing, but a challenge that I had was really kind of realizing that I couldn't help everyone all the time. It was incredible that a role that I literally structured myself turned into something that was so needed, to the point where I had founders calling me on the weekends, on holidays, etc. Which again, I think that shows you kind of the level of value. But
Mm.
because there's so many of them, you actually have to prioritize, which you can't help
Yeah.
everyone. You've got to kind of prioritize the newer companies, because the older companies in a lot of cases would have a people leader, even though they may be calling me into something,
Yeah.
or maybe they have a more junior people leader. And so that just meant there was less time to help more people. And I would say, again, that kind of goes back to the biggest challenge, which is scale. It's just hard to scale as a team of one.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of value in a VC organization with the size of the portfolios that a lot of these VCs have, in having somebody like yourself who can come in and put a scalable kind of, I don't want to kind of undervalue what you're doing, but a cookie cutter
Yep.
approach to this is how you scale up talent and talent retention,
Mm-hmm.
not just acquisition,
Mm-hmm.
and then the
Yep.
operations piece that comes with it. But obviously, as the portfolio grows, inherently, so does the demand on you and your time. Um,
Yep.
and of course, a lot of the VCs, which is how you and I came together, they will use their own talent acquisition
That's
company,
right.
a recruitment agency, to help them scale up,
That's
which is
right.
obviously, one of the guys in your portfolio. We were fortunate enough to help them grow from seeded to round A. Um,
Right.
and I think talking about the programs that you've been responsible for and building, talk us through
Mhm.
that. So there's somebody that's listening who wants to evolve. They want to become the Swiss Army knife
Mhm.
of talent and operations and culture and L&D and everything else that you've been participating in. What would that process look like? If you were to kind of spell it out to them to say, right, this is the kind of program which will make you successful in delivery.
Mhm. And are you pointing to people who are looking to get into startups, or are you pointing to VCs that maybe don't have a function like this?
Either or, really. I guess how like the strength of the talent acquisition and retention program that you built helped
Yes.
you overcome the challenges that your
Mhm.
portfolio faced, that the three startups perhaps have faced.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you actually it's not offensive to me that you're saying cookie cutter, because I do start with the foundation and then of course make it bespoke to whatever organization there may be. There's definitely a lot of building from scratch, like starting from the very beginning, but there was also a lot of like using a foundation and then building on top of it. If I'm talking to VCs, one of the things that I would say is um, one of the best things about bringing an operator in is the fact that you have that pattern recognition and you've actually done it before. It's not necessarily in theory, like, maybe a B school person who had an experienced life in a startup might be able to give you kind of theoretical knowledge around how to do something in people operations, in talent acquisition, but maybe they hadn't actually put it into place before. So that was something that kind of, I would say, to VCs is actually very valuable. It was, and it proved itself out very, very, very quickly. So what I would say to VCs is go out and look for that operator and try to bring that person in, as
Mhm.
opposed to thinking about the talent partner or platform role as being a feeder into the investments team.
Mm.
I think in a lot of cases they'll put a junior person who's actually got their sights on the investing team in that first seat, and frankly, all they can do is make connections if they don't have a background in this. So I would say there is a ton of strength in bringing in an operator, a people ops operator who's been there, done that, seen that
Mm.
before.
Mm.
Um, and then I would say, just kind of what you were talking about in terms of, building a strong TA program. What are some of the challenges? And I kind of talked about this before, which is just the scale piece and not being able to be available to everyone. And one of the things that I realized very quickly was partnerships were really incredible. So I think you're a great example of someone that I created a partnership with, that wasn't necessarily with the sort of the Trues of the world, the Rivieras of the world, et cetera, which are kind of the known quantities in startups. But I brought in these really technical, get startup life, understand the DNA of an early stage startup person. So they're not going to be sending candidates that that have spent their entire career in Cisco or Google
Mm.
or whatever it may be, and being able to also understand and drill into the culture piece and want to understand it. That's why I think, our partnership works so well, is like you had the curiosity to really understand what that role looked like and what would actually be the proper DNA.
Yeah.
So that was something that I think that actually was super helpful, is I had a couple of key partners that weren't necessarily associated with these large firms, so that they could get that boutique attention. They had the prior knowledge of working with early stage companies and what
Mm.
that looks like versus a Series A company, a Series B company, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they also, and you, as well as my other partners, had a really good sense of what my expectations were. And that really, your work is also a reflection of me because I'm the person bringing you in.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to always make create partnerships. And believe me, I was consistently talking to lots of people, but I would know when it was the right person to develop that kind of
Yeah.
you're like my person, and I will toss you jobs and all
Hmm.
of those things. Because again, I think this is this piece of my role was critical. And if I didn't look good through bringing in those recruiters
Yeah.
that were going to give them that white glove type of service, I don't know how valuable I would have been on the TA side, to be honest, because
Mm.
I couldn't do it all. I
Yeah.
mean, I saved our portfolio close to $3 million in recruiting fees on the people
Yeah.
that I introduced, which were mostly leadership and very senior talent.
Hmm.
But sometimes these companies need, software engineers who can build, or, that might just be a senior engineer, not a principal engineer, and they
Mm.
just need kind of doers and people that can build. And so I would come to you and my other partners to help me identify who those candidates were and start surfacing those candidates
Yeah.
to my portfolio. So partnerships was huge for me.
Yeah, and there was a lot of times that I can recall where you did often say, "I will introduce you to the startups that I think suit you and the way you work," um, which you
Right.
did. And I draw reference to one of the startups that you did kindly introduce me to, and I just gave them advice. That we didn't actually get to a
Mm-hmm.
point where there was a working relationship, but I think that's what it's all about.
Right.
It's kind
Sure.
of almost like paying it forward, I guess. I gave them support on this is what the salaries you can expect for these skills. This is what you'll pay in these
Yep.
regions. This is how you can hire internationally, which is a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the challenges that these startups face. These guys are, they might be
100%.
graduates, they might be 5, 6, 7 years just out of their,
Yep.
out of their degree into their first, real startup. And a lot of these people, and
Right.
this is probably an interesting question for you, um, when companies are expanding into new territories, I know you and I have spoke about it previously, and I think you get a lot of people that ask you for question when they're like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I hire? Some of your clients from Israel, for example, and they ask you, how do I hire into
Mm-hmm.
America? So, what's your
Right.
advice in that scenario? How do you help them expand their portfolio, their business, and what challenges does that typically present to you?
Yeah, so I think I was probably the most helpful with companies that were coming into the US. Obviously, because I had a good sense of the lay of the land of employment law, of changing employment law, and things that we had to get in place in order for them to be a proper entity,
Mm,
a business that has a recruiting function. And so doing that was actually the easy part. What I'd say was more challenging was just the fact that like I didn't have a good baseline for understanding HR and laws in other countries.
mm,
And if you don't know that level of HR, and we had founders in Germany and France, Israel, Canada. And so I wouldn't be able to lend a ton of help outside of, introductions to talent, outside of cultural things. Until they made that US presence known. And
mm,
then the other thing I would say too is that, and this, well, we went through this insane hiring bonanza last year. And while simultaneously kind of dealing with this new world of everyone going fully remote. And one of the things that was incredibly hard to keep up with, and part of the reason why I'd say, again, I partnered with you is because you gave them that type of information around compensation, what to expect,
mm,
et cetera, which is kind of the way that I've always worked. And so what I'd say about that is, so you have these remote employees, you're hiring and hiring and hiring. And what ended up happening in certain cases was that the salaries were going exponentially high. So people are paying a lot, and the problem with that is now you have to onboard all of these heads, and how do you get those people productive? And we
mm,
saw productivity go down in certain cases once they ended up hiring a bunch of people,
mm,
and so a lot of them got stuck with paying high salaries, overpaying people. And frankly, at the end of the day, we know what started happening in what August, September is.
Yeah.
Everybody started to lay off. And then the other thing I would just say is like, I grew up in Southeast Asia and I went to school with 90 nationalities. So I have a good sense of different cultures and things
Hmm.
like that. But at the same time, there are cultural nuances that apply to talent. And
Yeah.
you know this again, being based in Europe and working with a lot of companies in different countries in Europe,
Mm.
different countries have different nuances around work style, around how they work, what their expectations are for
Yeah.
work. And so, like an example would be, in a country where they really value free time and where work is, 9 to 6 or whatever it may be, and then they balk at like, well, the expectation is that you work past that, and what are you doing at 7 p.m.,
Mm.
might get frustrated around that expectation because they may not have the type of commitment and sort of scrappiness that an American startup employee
Yeah.
did, for better or for worse. And I would say the other thing, which is interesting, was um, when startups would start to move to other countries. So instead of not thinking about America, but mostly thinking about overseas operations. So if we had an American company that was opening an office in um, India, China, Portugal, wherever, is getting to them to think about these teams as literally part of the team.
Hmm.
And for so long, people would treat these sort of other offices as a place where they could send sort of the grunt work, maybe undoing sort of the spaghetti code, and sometimes toss really the worst jobs and worst
Hmm.
projects. So I think there was this idea of how do we become more inclusive of all of the people, treating everybody the same, and how do we provide psychological safety to all of these people who are kind of spread out
Yeah.
around the world. So lots of
Mm.
challenges, but very interesting challenges.
Yeah, and I think my experience of building some of the companies from Israel is a lot of them now go remote first, and there is
Yep.
a better culture now in startups
Mm-hmm.
of how to onboard and how to actually manage and retain people that are in remote employment. Um, like to give the example of as the client that I worked on successfully that were backed by Boldstart was to
Mm-hmm.
build them a remote engineering team to build them a product to get them out of stealth, all of which were remote,
Mm-hmm.
all of which were in different
Mm-hmm.
countries, and that worked very well. And I think with the right onboarding program, with the right understanding from the existing team and the founding team as to how to treat these people, how to bring them in, how to then manage them and make them feel valued after is I think the key element to that, which obviously, you're alluding to and the things that you've done successfully in your programs. Um, and I think there is a big shift again. I think over the last 3 years, we're kind of in like another shift now of the market. Last year, as you say,
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit of a baby boom in terms of tech. Um, and now I think there's a big shift in terms of what it looks like in recruitment, across all of
Mm-hmm.
the recruitment
Mm-hmm.
industry, whether it's TA, whether it's recruitment agencies. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what's your kind of take? Because you obviously know a lot of people, you talk to a lot of people that are in talent acquisitions or recruitment roles. What's your kind of outlook on this year going towards the end of the year?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of interesting things happening. So what you were alluding to with the hiring sort of bonanza and then turning into riffing people and actually seeing productivity going up is exactly what you were talking about, which is making a better onboarding program and how do you skill those people up as quickly as possible. So some of the things that I see kind of being trends going forward are skills-based hiring first and foremost, which is changing, what a talent pipeline actually looks like. And so companies are going to have to start getting comfortable with the idea of hiring based on based solely on the skills needed to perform the job, rather than things like their credentials, their prior experience, or their education, and starting to have to remove those things, and remove those requirements, and look purely at those skills that the person brings to the table. So I'd say skill-based hiring. And what kind of goes hand in hand with that is internal mobility. So there is this realization that more people doesn't mean more productive necessarily. And so you start to value the employees that you actually have. And in a lot of cases, you've already done a reduction in force, and cut some of the people. And so you've got your sort of team there, and you're not looking to spend more money. So internal mobility becomes a huge thing. So moving people around based on projects, based on, again, their skills, not just based on their job title and their direct experience. So the need for passing along institutional knowledge, for introducing them to the key players, and that taking 3 months to ramp. I see people focusing more on moving people around. So internal mobility, skills-based hiring, and then another thing kind of to add there would be upskilling and retraining. So we're seeing a lot of, you have an employee in a role, you want them to move into another function or another department. So let's actually work with them to understand what we actually need in this particular job, and then it's our role to actually train them and provide them with the knowledge that they need in order to, again, move up a level or into an entirely different role. And then the last thing I would say is we're going to see a lot more fractional operator work, which is what I'm doing right now. And the reason being, companies are watching capital, and VCs aren't funding as many companies as they had been due to interest rates and other reasons in the last few years. And so fractional operator work becomes really attractive because you're not paying for an annual salary. And also, in most cases, it's cheaper than getting a McKinsey or a Bain or whomever it may be to come in and actually consult on those things. So you're actually getting a person who's been there, done that, has the pattern recognition, to come in and work fractionally as a leader, or maybe it's project work or whatever it may be. So I'm seeing also a lot of that kind of work. Actually, I want to add one more thing, because I do think that this is really important, which is sustainable performance. And I think this goes back to burnout, productivity going down during the pandemic initially, and then people deciding after staying at home that they're not going to deal with certain things like long hours, like lack of flexibility, like bad benefits. And so companies are being forced, frankly, to think about things like mental health, inclusion, tooling to bridge communication gaps for asynchronous and synchronous communications, and also PTO. What does PTO look like in order to keep their employees really happy and sort of performing at that desired level? So, I think lots of changes.
There's been an enormous, I think, culture shift across many different facets of how people are wanting to be hired now, and more importantly, how companies are wanting to hire people. So the skills-based hiring that you mentioned, I'm seeing a lot more of that, and it is driving the salaries in what a lot of people previously have deemed, cheap places to hire. We'll go and get some local talent in wherever it might be. You gave the example of Portugal. I know a lot of companies were previously setting up development hubs in Portugal because they could get them a lot cheaper than they would in Israel, for example. But that's now not the case. And it's much the same in India, for example. The salary demands now in India are about 40 to 50% of an increase, because people are skills-based testing. So the people are saying, well, you're testing my skill, not where I live, which I think is very fair.
Right.
So I still think there's a little bit more of a culture shift yet to take place, which we are seeing. But I think everything
Hmm.
that you've said in this conversation and all of the things that I obviously know about your capability and what you've achieved, from a VC perspective, it should make more sense than ever now to bring that kind of resource into their business and to be looking for people like you who have the ability to be multifaceted, to take your hand to all of these different departments in which they're going to need help in their portfolio. Um, because I
Right.
think the belts are being tightened. The investment going out is a little bit lighter than perhaps it once was. But more importantly, when they're
Right.
out looking in, they also have to streamline what's happening from an an efficiency perspective, economically, internally, and that's where you add, as you said, $3 million worth of value. Um, so hopefully everybody that has listened to this from the start can kind of see what I'm saying now when I say there needs to be an evolution of the TA role. And I think everything that you've explained is kind of where it is at in my mind's eye, and you're performing it
Hmm.
day by day. And hopefully the VCs that are listening to this and even the startups can think, actually, I didn't think about this and I need to now start considering these things because you, what they don't want to do is have a candidate pool that they're trying to attract that evolves without them. And they're then left,
Right.
trying to fill multiple hires and nobody wants to join them because they're not in tune with what the market's doing right now, which is the
That's right.
biggest challenge
That's
of all
right.
startups.
I love that you brought up, Will, just one thing that I wanted to note, the compensation piece, because that is one of the hardest things to get your arms around, because now it's starting to change from, like you said, the cost of living dictating some of what that salary looks like to the cost of the work done from that position. And so
Mm-hmm.
instead of thinking of countries as cheap places, you are ending up and thinking about zones of the United States. So you got your West Coast salary, that's the first market. Your second market is New York, Austin, Denver, Seattle, and then going kind of like and aligning that way.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually saying you're a software engineer 3, you're here, this is what we're paying. You're a software engineer 3 based in Tokyo, this
Yeah.
is what we're paying. And it's the same across the board. And
Yeah.
so there is a lot of evolving going on right now, which is exactly what you were making a point about.
It's interesting, and I think as we come to the end of the first quarter of the calendar year, I think there's going to be another 3 quarters of significant change. I think we're going to see a lot of recruitment companies, unless they diversify their business, go out of business. Unfortunately, I think we're
Yep.
going to see. I hope we see an evolution of the recruitment industry. Where
Yep.
it's more than bums in seats. It is more than that because I think recruitment needs to give more value than just filling a hire in a
Absolutely.
company. Um,
Absolutely.
and I hope that you and I can do another podcast. Maybe we'll do one every quarter and we'll
Yeah.
recap on what we're seeing from an evolutionary perspective.
I I totally, I hope so too. But also remember, Will, that is something that sets you apart from a lot of different people is being able to bring in that information share that you
Yeah,
can share with all of our founders. And some talent companies just put, it's I have 4 roles, here are 4 people, those
yeah.
kinds of things. And so I think it is becoming a much more strategic function,
Mhm.
which um, is very exciting.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I hope everybody that's in TA that is perhaps in an unfortunate circumstance at the moment, um, hearing what we're saying about how do they evolve themselves, what can they do? Is there a qualification? Is there something that they can get involved with that otherwise they wouldn't be asked to do because it's not in their job description? I think those are the
Right.
people, unfortunately, in the recruitment companies that aren't doing something similar that are going to get left behind. Um,
Absolutely.
So it's going to be very interesting. We're about out of time, so I'm going to let you go about your day. I didn't hear your dog snore, and I didn't hear the construction workers outside, so we did all right.
It was a win.
It was a win. But look, it's always great to talk to you. I always enjoy our conversations, so I will let you go and enjoy your day. It was great to talk, and hopefully we can do this again in a couple of months' time.
Absolutely, Will. Thank you so much for the opportunity and of course for your partnership over the years.
Brilliant. It's been my pleasure. Well, I'll talk to you very soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.